Welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today we're going to be talking about models for teaching in the mob or for coaching. And it's just, a couple different things we've observed while mob programming and seeing that different styles have come about. And I've seen it done different ways by different people. And there's several effective ways. And so we're going to outline a couple of those here today. And basically the basic dichotomy we're going to be going back and forth between is from the perspective of the coach who has something to share or teach to someone on the team, to the rest of the mob. So from their perspective, one is I do, we do, and then you do. And then another perspective is you do. So the mob or the person learning the skill will do it. And if needed, we'll do it together. And so I guess jumping in, Chris, what examples of I do, we do, you do have you seen that come to mind?
Oh yeah, so there's a lot, because mobbing amplifies learning in general, and as you go, you'll encounter different learning styles and different ways of moving that forward. So specific examples of like I do, we do, you do. In the early days of mobbing, I'd say that this is probably 8 years or 9 years ago from when this is being recorded. There was a period of time, and this is like really specific. So I came onto a ASP.NET team, and I had done a lot of .NET MVC. And so there was kind of a lot of confusion between the style that I was navigating in the kind of the MVC style versus what a traditional web forms ASP.NET. And so there was a lot of need for navigation. And I kind of naturally fell into this because we were just trying to figure out mobbing for the first time, really. And so I would navigate the MVC pattern, and then I would find people in the mob that were ready to kind of take that first step in, and so then we would do it together, basically, and then essentially find those opportunities to identify where the holes were in the knowledge, and then the you do in the end was, okay, this other person will then navigate all the way through, and I shouldn't really be needed, and I can be silent. And so that was a natural evolution. I think that was kind of the first style of mentoring that I ever did in a mob. So that was really an interesting paradigm, for sure. How about you, Austin?
Yeah. And I think the example you gave is perfect in that. And I guess I just want to highlight, it could be anything, tech or non-tech. So I've seen it relate to facilitating a priority discussion with a product person or a customer or a product owner. I've seen it done for how to do TDD in general in real code, not just on FizzBuzz on Cyber Dojo. It could be how to do a certain refactoring. It could be how to troubleshoot customer problem. And even how to facilitate mobbing. I've seen the I do, we do, you do show up. And so, sometimes it is literally I do. It's not only like someone navigating in a mob, which is kind of a we do a little bit, but there's been some cases where someone has done it outside of the mobbing session just to like prove that like, hey, you can do this refactoring and it doesn't blow up the system and the test still pass, right? And then they'll be like, oh, okay, I kind of see how that works. Maybe we'll navigate that in the mob. So the person navigates it. And then he'll let someone else navigate it. And that's maybe kind of part of the we do. And then the you do could be with that person who helped teach the skill. And I've also seen it be applied to DevOps type stuff, is still in the mob or they've left. So I've seen that as well, where someone comes into a mob for a while. The I do, we do, you do happens, and then that person leaves, but then that knowledge keeps spreading to other people. And so even without that person in the mob at all, they're able to do TDD for a full vertical slice on a feature or add a job to a pipeline infrastructure as code or whatever it is. So I think that's kind of the basics of that model. And then I'll turn it back to you, Chris, for the other model, which is basically instead of someone coming and showing how to do it, like right out the gate, it's kind of flipped to you do, And if needed, maybe we'll do it together, right? Yeah, what comes to mind for you for this one, Chris?
Yeah, so very similarly, I think that there are opportunities often uh, to kind of not do any sort of laying the groundwork. This is especially true for people that just have a different way of doing things, and maybe they've seen it done before, but not specifically your way. And so in the you do we do, maybe somebody that is able to be in a coaching role and has maybe more information that can be distributed, then you can actually have this conversation of, why don't you go ahead and navigate this, and I will ask questions as we go along. And so it's kind of like a Socratic decomposition or deconstruction of an idea, right? So it's like I will just ask questions of like, okay, well, how will it scale? And then if the person is like, well, actually, I don't know how it'll scale, then you can kind of come back and find a better path forward. This is also, I think, a really strong technique when there are a lot of coaches and maybe only one person learning, because I often see people end up disagreeing with each other on how to coach or what to coach. And so in a situation where you have multiple paths from the people holding the knowledge, then I've seen it be especially useful to switch to this mode when somebody has to learn something and there are two people arguing about what they should learn. So rather than doing that, you have that person do their best with what they have, and then the coaches will say, well, how does it scale? How can we make it? How can we refactor it to be more readable? How can we do this? How can we do that? And just how and why questions, leading to a better and better solution. And so that way they don't have to pick between like mentor one and mentor two and be in this panic cycle. I like both methods for different situations. How about you, Austin?
Yeah. For me, the you do we do has been more of a learning area for me, and it's been something I've been trying to grow in lately. And I've seen others do it and watch how they interact in a mob, and it's been quite fascinating to learn from them how they do this style. And it's what's so different about it is I think it takes for someone like me who's very verbose and excited when working on problems to be quiet. Yeah. So like the mob might be in the middle of a problem, right? And if it's an urgent problem and they're about to jump off a cliff, maybe that's not the time to be silent. Mm-hmm. But if it's not something that dramatic, to show restraint and to be like, okay, they're working through the problem. I know the solution, but is the best way for them to learn is for me to jump in and be like, oh, hey, I know the solution. Here it is. It's A. And I've seen, like we talked about with I do, we do, you do, is that can work, and that can be a good way to teach. And I've seen people learn that way before, is like they watch you solve the problem, and then every time it comes up, they learn more and more how to do it themselves, and then they can do it without you. Yeah. But to, instead of doing that, to jump in straight into the I do, we do, you do, is just to let them problem solve and let them struggle and let them feel the pains. And I think the phrase that we've heard before, I don't know who exactly came from, was, so to speak, steal the learning.
Yep. Learning theft.
Yeah. Learning theft, yeah. Right. And that might be dramatic, because I think with I do, we do, it's not necessarily stolen, but maybe it's not learned as quickly or learned with the pain.
So that's where learning theft came from. So the idea is in the I do, we do, you do model, I think it only really works if it's a repetitive task. So it's like, hey, we're going to refactor again. I do, we do, you do. So it's like, you're in a new situation, but it's the same thing, like making a better name, right?
Yeah.
But learning theft really comes into play when you have this one opportunity to do it, or a very infrequent opportunity. So for example, defining a new architecture for a greenfield project, it is, to give them the right answer is learning theft. You are stealing their opportunity to learn something about defining a new architecture. and so and that was a big thing. So we were doing a lot in the early days of mobbing. We were doing a lot of I do, you do, we do, and the person who used the term learning theft was referring to me in that specific situation, and it was because we were always doing I do, we do, you do, but there were these opportunities, really important opportunities. And I totally, like, once we had this retrospective, I was like, I totally agree with you. Yeah, we need to not do that in this situation. And so learning theft came from these like infrequent opportunities where it's like, oh man, but even in those repetitive situations, it could be good. It might be slow at first, but then people will start to learn more and more, especially with like the Socratic style. Like, I'm going to ask you a question to break your worldview. But I think in the I do, we do, you do, you can really shape where somebody's going, but it has to be frequent and repetitive. And that's kind of where I draw the line when I'm doing that. So, I'm not super great at doing this all the time when I should, but the you do, we do model, I try and always use that when there's not going to be another opportunity for that learning again soon. And that's been kind of my learning from that whole experience.
Yeah, that's a good heuristic. And hearing you tell your story made me reflect on when I've done you do, we do. And it's probably for a funny or bad reason, is that when, for example, I've come into a mob before and they weren't doing TDD, right?
Yeah.
And so I suggested, hey, we could do TDD here. And they were like, no. Mm-hmm. And so I had no option but you do, we do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's where I have most of my experience, not from thoughtfully thinking as a coach and realizing, here's a good time to do you do, we do. It's kind of like, oh, well, they don't want my solution. That's fine. That's good. That's good. And so I think when I've been in that mode, it's, jumping into the Socratic part, like, when do you speak up and then how, so for example, a mob not doing TDD, I would wait for painful moments and be like, hey, why do you think we're having this pain? Do you think, is there any other ways to not have this pain? And then I think in those painful moments when they're struggling, it might be like, they're more open to try a different way. Right. But there's this whole art of knowing not to say it in a way like, I told you so, and rub it in their face. But also just be like, hey, is this a good time to run that experiment I brought up, a few months ago? Or, and then also preventing of jumping off the cliff. When do you jump in and when do you not?
So like, for example, I think pain can be a really big teacher, right? Yeah. So I think, just in general, we're learning to walk as toddlers and fall over and hurt ourselves, and okay, don't do that next time. And so, there is this idea that, getting through the solution and then seeing it fail. And I think this is why test-driven development is such a powerful teacher in general, is because you write a test, it fails, you learn something new about what you were writing, and then you go back into it, right? And that's part of what makes it effective. And so sometimes you do let them walk off the cliff, but and hopefully there's a test in place or something along those lines. If you see something that will be catastrophic, that's part of mobbing, is being a safety net for the rest of the team. But asking those Socratic questions again can be really good. It's like, okay, well, I see that you're doing a nested for loop on items that will grow. So how are you going to ensure scalability, or how scalable is this? It's really funny because no one really ever asks like big O notation computational complexity questions, but sometimes I'll just say, hey, what's the big O notation for this function here? And they'll be like, what are you talking about? And I'll be like, oh, remember back in college and you were doing, The operational complexity of this will be and exponential or factorial or something. What is it for this right now? And so that sort of thing is like, oh, they were about to put something into production that would have just slammed the CPU, right? Because we're working on an N of like 5 versus like 500,000 or something. So it's like stuff like that. That's like a really clean example, but there's also questions, like especially for refactoring, right? You could say, hey, let's give that a better name. Or you can say, what does everybody think somebody's going to understand when they read this line, right? Because it's not, hey, you should refactor. It's just like, what is, you can ask about the outcome or something along those lines to get people to just kind of think critically about it. And so critical thinking is a learned skill, and some developers come through just being taught all the time. And so critical thinking, especially for somebody that's new to the industry, they can actually really be caught off guard. And so what you want to do is you want to ask a Socratic question that is 2 or 3 steps removed from the answer. And so maybe they have a correct answer that surprises you and you learn something as a coach, but you also have this opportunity to allow them to mentally see the failure by thinking it through, and then realizing, oh, like that was, that took me down the wrong path, and then backing up. But you also don't want to make somebody feel stupid for the decision that they made. And so you just got to be really hyper aware of that, because the Socratic method is very dangerous, and you don't want to abuse it, right?
Yeah. You definitely want to communicate your intent and why you're asking the questions, and make it very comfortable environment. And and I think, and I've seen different approaches to it. Some are more direct with their questions, and some are very facilitator, like, oh, that experiment failed. What would you like to do next? You know what I mean? You're just kind of like very, not hands off, but very non-opinionated about your questions, and just letting them explore and guiding them through their experiments and their learning. And I've come to respect some mob programmers who their coaching style is very much in this mode, and it almost feels silent. But you can see their influence is very, very strong as well. And so it's a less verbose style with some people, but it can also be very influential. And maybe it's more of a long-term game, right? Because you're not teaching right away in the moment, in the mob today, the potentially a better experiment or better way to do it. It might take months for the team to learn, but they might learn it really, really well because they kind of discovered it themselves, so to speak. And then one other thing I was going to throw out is it can also apply to other things, not non-tech related. So I've seen this done with interactions with non-tech people, and basically letting the team fail, and then maybe step in and facilitate to kind of recover the meeting so the relationships are good, but let them fail in the interaction with a product person. So an example I can think of is, let someone asks a very high level product question, and then a technical person responds with 4 minutes of technical detail that doesn't matter to the person who asked the question, right? Instead of like I do, we do, which like you facilitate the meeting from the beginning, you kind of let it run its course, but then maybe provide feedback afterwards, or coach in the moment after the failure. Maybe failure is a strong word, but maybe area for improvement happens.
Well, and a lot of this, I mean, this is why psychologically safe teams are so effective, is because they can give feedback without fear of retaliation. And so if you're not in that mode, right, you have to establish safety beforehand, and positive intent and everything. And so everything that we're saying right now is predicated on the idea that you have psychological safety on your team. If you don't, then all of these strategies any mentor-mentee relationship will fail without psychological safety. You're not going to, to the point where it's viewed as abusive, right? Like you can't teach anyone anything. So that's just a really key factor.
Yep. And then one last thing is we've been talking about kind of more constructive feedback, but also this is a good to put on the sponsor hat and celebrate moments of success. I think we've talked about it before. You catch someone in success, right? So that can be even more powerful than giving them constructive feedback. Is like, oh yeah, you just responded with a very concise answer that answered their question. And I thought that was fantastic. I think that really, made the person happy and they understood. Or, hey, wow, that TDD loop was really tight. That was fantastic. Or that name is really good. Thanks everybody for contributing. Things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important to focus on the bright spots, and probably more important because a lot of these behaviors, especially in a mob, people witness that. And so if you say, hey, good job with that test, like in front of other people, like people will be like, oh, those behaviors are good. And that positive reinforcement can be really good. And so you can always produce that, finding ways to recognize people, peers, people above you. If you're a leader of some kind, people below you in the chain. All of that is just super important.
Awesome. Right on. Well, please like and subscribe and share with anybody you thought would be interested how to learn in a pair, in a mob, or even on a team. Some of these similar concepts would apply. And until next time, mob well and have a good one, everybody.
Bye.